Hello everyone, Jeff here again. If you saw my last video on the other window that I repaired, thanks and thanks for coming back. This is your first time seeing this window project. I have one out there I posted last week. Didn't have as much damage as this one. I used some putty on it. This one here, I don't think I'm going to get away with being able to use putty. It's pretty rotted up. There's not much wood left on this one. I think the only alternative is either buy another window, or I'm going to try to just cut this wood, this rotted wood, out of the way, salvage these corners over here, and then try to make a new rail to slip down on each side of this and then drop down into here. See if I can make it work. We'll see. Get this latch out of the way so I can run it through the table saw up against the fence. Use those clamps to hold it in place while I take the pivot bracts off up there. This is the pivot bracket. If you watched my other video, I had mentioned pivot bracket in there. And this whole corner has to be very strong because it's under a lot of stress when you tilt the windows out to clean them and that. So gotta make sure I sure all that up. It looks like I'm gonna have to do some work, fill these holes in and re-drill them because they seem a little loose. But these blocks up in here are all one piece. They're in better condition than that one I had to repair the complete assembly up here on that last window. So there's a good chance I'm going to be able to cut all this out of the way, mill up a board that will just slip down over top of this, be on each side, solid all the way down the middle, and then I can cut my groove to accept the weather seal at the bottom. It might be doable. Trying to get my table saw set up, see if I can come in there and make a nice clean cut. It came out pretty good. This corner down here, I'm going to soak it down with the liquid wood hardener. Maybe even put a little bit in here. This is still solid, but won't hurt to soak it down a little bit. There's definitely a staple in there. That's what I hit on the other end, I think. So over here, what I think I'm going to end up having to do, since there's an angle there, I'm going to have to square that up before I get measurements, start making the cap that I'm going to put on here. A little bit of material left behind right here. Stuff works real good. Soak it in as much as you can. And then let it sit overnight. And it gets pretty hard. Once I'm able to build the cap that I need to go over all this, once I'm ready to put it all together, do all the dry fitting, make sure it's going to work right, figure out clamping, all that. And then once I'm ready to go for it, right in this area down here, I'm going to mix a batch of the high strength marine epoxy and add the filler material in with it to give it some more body and to fill it all in. I'm going to fill this all in this area here with that before I slip the cap down over everything. And then the rest of it, I'll just put the regular liquid epoxy on there. I'll have to tape the window off real good and all that, so any runoff and that doesn't get stuck to the window. Wipe off all the excess, all that. The marine epoxy will hold it in there forever. Here I'm squaring up the ends of the stiles, getting them ready so I can get measurements to make the new rail. Taking the measurements for these from the top of the window so that they'll both be even. Using my knife to make a cut line to follow. Using my pull saw for a nice clean cut. Now I'm going to start cutting up the length for the new rail. I'm repurposing a hunk of 4x4 that I had left over from my last project. I cut it out of a post and did a repair on the post. I decided to use this because I'm sure it's at least 30 plus years old, which means it came from older stock growth, and I figured it'd be a better choice than going and buying some modern material. Seems like this is a little more dense than the newer stuff that's out there. So I cut it to one width, and I'm running it through the planer to get it nice and flat. Then I'll make another cut, 90 degrees from that cut, and I will run it through the joiner with the first planed edge up against the fence of the joiner. That way those two will be square to one another, they'll be perpendicular. And then I'll use those two edges to make the last two cuts and run them through the planer and joiner. Taking my square and then holding up to the light. Make sure that it's a perfect 90-degree angle there. And the last cut. Now this one I'll just run through the planer and bring it down to the proper thickness. It'll be parallel to the first cut that I made and ran through the planer, so that will make it square with the other two cuts that I ran through the joiner. And I'll cut it to length. It's a little tough when you're filming it by yourself, 'cause you can't get every shot in there. Starts to drag the project out when you got to stop, move the camera, make a cut or whatever you're doing, flip it back around. Because each time you end up stopping the camera, then you got to edit some of that out. So there's the blank. Another day. Time to get back to working on the rail for the window. Time to cut the bridle joints on the ends. Cut the mortises into them. Got to get some measurements on each side of the tenon that's sticking up there. And transfer it over to the marking gauges. Get my measurements and jot them down and then set the marking gauges. So I measured from the edge to the tenon, the width of the tenon, thickness of the tenon, and this edge to the tenon. I set the marking gauges up off camera. Now I'll start transferring those measurements onto the end of the rail. Prefer to use the marking gauge because the lines are more accurate than trying to lay it out with a pencil in a square. And those cuts that are put in there from the marking gauge even help guide the saw when you start cutting. Flip the board around, make it a little more comfortable for trying to get the marks made. Excuse me, sneezing, a little bit of dust in the shop. So with that marking gauge going across the grain, I like to just use it to transfer the mark, little cut there, and then I use my knife with a square to get a better line in there because of the going across the grain. That marking gauge just seems to tear the wood up. Nice sharp knife does a better job. And I take the knife and drop it into that mark that I made and then line the square up to it. So across the top, I'm going back in there with the gauge again, just to make that mark a little deeper. And then I'm going to go in with a chisel and make a little slice in there. Come in at an angle and hit the line, and a little chip will pop out, making that groove a little deeper. Gives you a little valley to let the saw drop into. Just clean out any of the debris that's still left behind. So there you can see those grooves on the top, little valleys. The saw drop right in there, and then there's the lines going up the side. Alright, I'll start my saw cut. Let it drop down in that groove and then start working my way down the side, following that line, and work my way across. Start coming down the other side. And let's speed it up and get this going. I like to square the workpiece up into vise, sort of let gravity help guide it down too, help it get nice and straight cuts. And my coping saw to get rid of the waste, and then it's time to chisel. So I'll use my chisel, drop it down in to clean up the depth, get it down to the scribe line. Come down one side and flip it, and then come down the other side. Here I'm scribing the other end, but I'm just gonna cut that out off camera. And there's both ends with the mortises for the bridle joint. Dropped her down. So this is pretty much the end of this part of the video. I'm going to split it up into two different videos. The second one I'll be doing the milling work. Got to cut angles down the side, angle across the top, groove down the middle to accept the weather strip. A lot more milling work, so if you like the video, click the like button and subscribe. So keep your eye out for the rest of the video in the next week or two. And hopefully you'll like that. And I'm hoping the video's giving people an idea on what they can do and can't do, I guess. And that's what I'm doing this for. Showing projects that I'm working on.